This is the first of briefings of this kind in 2021, where we are going to actually look back at what happened in out of the digital policy developments in, well, a bit of January and most of February, and sneak peek into what's coming in March and what are the main trends. Now, for those of you that are not so often with us, we all receive a lot of updates on digital policy development. Sometimes it's hard to actually get the gist of what's happening, see the trends and zoom in and zoom out, and that is the purpose of this monthly briefing every last Tuesday of the month. For those of you that are not new to our briefing, you'll see a little bit of changes from what we have been doing in the previous months and editions, now over 50, where we're not going to list the events, but we'll rather focus on the key 3 trends of the last month and cover some of the main other developments and then look into the next month. So we'll be more analytical, we'll be more exchanging the views, and we also expect your interventions in this regard. So feel free to use the chat at any point. Let me share a little bit of innovations with you. One of the innovations is also that we now have the French translation, so you can switch the channel if it's easier for you to follow in French. Please feel free to do so. In case you want to share a thought or a question in chat, try to do it in English, but if you can't, if you really have to do it in French, we'll find a way to channel it to the discussions. To help me with this briefing, with us today we have our colleague Susonia. She's connecting from Turkey. She will, I think, in Ankara these days. She'll be moderating the chat. She'll help boost the discussions in chat, but also feed your thoughts, comments, questions into the mainstream of the discussions. When it comes to the trends, we'll have 3 trends as always, and it's my pleasure to welcome my colleague Stephanie joining from Malta, Marilia from Strasbourg, Arvin from Belgrade. We also have Marco with us from Geneva, telling us what we can expect from Diplo and the GIP in the next period, and my colleague Andriana, who is with me in Belgrade, will help us with some of the regional updates. Last but not the least, this is sort of a new practice. Each month we'll try to have a guest for the briefing, and it's really my great pleasure that we start with a sort of a colleague of ours, Jean-Yves Hart, who is a Senior Director Strategic Partnership at Microsoft. Jean-Yves Hart will be connecting in a few minutes when we start diving more deeply into the trends. So relax, grab your coffee if you haven't already, and let's start with the first round of trends that we have this month. There are a couple of trends that we are starting with, and I'll just do a snapshot of some of the trends. So on one side, somewhere from Australia, basically, the trend comes about the discussions about news. Who is paying for the news in social media? What is the responsibility of the social media for the news content? Many related issues. The second issue that we have, the second trend that we have, will be more related to a very recent sort of a news about Uber and how workers in the gig economy will be treated. The third trend will be focused on cryptocurrencies and all the buzzwords around that, not only Bitcoin, but also the Chinese cryptocurrencies. But let's go one by one. We are starting with the first trend, which is related to the news content. And as I mentioned, the first news actually sort of broke in a way from Australia. But without taking much time, I'm passing the floor to our colleague Amrita, who is based in India, and she's covering this story briefly from Asia Pacific angle. So let me pass the floor to Amrita to announce this part of the trend. Amrita.
That the Australian Parliament is scheduled to consider the draft laws this month, which will be the world's first laws that would force the digital giants to finance journalism. Google, who had initially opposed the planned legislation and even threatened to shut down if the law is enacted, has now concluded its own contracts with Australian publishers to pay and use their content. While Google and Facebook can afford to pay for the Australian news they link to, they are concerned about the precedent the Australian legislation could set globally as regulators in other jurisdictions such as EU and Canada are actively watching the developments in Australia.
Thank you, Amrita. Well, this was just scratching the surface. And now it's my pleasure to invite my colleague Stephanie, who is joining us from Malta. And Stephanie will do a bit of a deeper dive into what is this whole topic about. Stephanie, welcome, and well, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vlad. Pleasure to be here with you. Yes, as you rightly say, and Amrita also digged a little bit into this, the issue of platforms paying publishers for news content and the issue of negotiating the terms has been the top trend, the top main development in February. As has been already said, Australia will introduce the news media code. There were issues, there were reactions by Facebook and by Google, and as we shall hear, there were also interventions by Microsoft. In brief, I would just say that there are three main issues. So the first is to pay or not to pay. So Facebook says it generates billions of free referrals to Australian publishers, and Google also says it supports the news industry. The issue of bargaining power. So you have on one hand big tech giants, and on the other hand small publishers with a bit of a difference in their ability to bargain. And the third issue, linked specifically to the Australian Media Code, is that it gives the authority, the code gives the authority to the arbiter to make decisions, which is something that has made the companies a little bit uncomfortable. With that, Vlad, I'll give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Again, I remind you all that we have the chat, so feel free to share any sort of reflections, comments, questions. And in the meantime, while you're preparing that, and Sonia is helping with the discussions, it's my pleasure, as I mentioned, to introduce the guest of this month, Jean-Yves Hart from Microsoft. And Jean-Yves, welcome to our briefing for February. There is a particular reason why we invited Jean-Yves, or Microsoft in a way, as a guest, because Microsoft has stepped into this discussion, and recently even the president of Microsoft, Brett Smith, published the article in which it was quite clear about what are the responsibilities of the platforms and so on. In a way, there are speculations what will happen next in US, how other countries will move ahead with that, and so on. So, Jean-Yves, if you can take the floor, what is sort of a Microsoft's position on that, and why has Microsoft stepped in a way in these discussions? Let me see if we have Jean-Yves with us.
Sure.
Yes.
I hope that you can see me. Thank you very much, Vlad. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about these developments in Australia and the position which we at Microsoft have taken, the position that others have taken. Let me start by providing a little bit of context. You step back, you see that over the past years, we have witnessed really the emergence of a number of technology platforms that are offering services which compete with traditional business. That's the case, for instance, of Amazon, which is top news also these days, competing with retail stores, Netflix, and movie theaters, Uber, and taxis. And so there are a number of digital platforms and digital services that are competing with more traditional businesses. Journalism is not immune from the challenges of digital technologies and the digital transformation. Although in the case of journalism, there is really a two-way relationship between traditional media and platforms such as search engines and social media platform, which provides the context in which those developments are taking place in Australia. It's this two-way relationship which is interesting. On the one hand, news definitely are lead products for search engines and for social media platforms. They are the product through which those platforms can attract and retain eyeballs, can attract and retain user engagement. On the other hand, at the same time, and as you were mentioning initially, Vlad, when you started this discussion, it's clear that platforms such as Facebook and Google refer a lot of digital traffic to the news media and traditional media businesses. If you look at what happened in Australia, in 2019, the University of Canberra proposed and in fact published a report which shows that 33% of Australian consumers access news through social media, 33% of them. And 25% of Australian consumers access news through search engines. And so there is this two-way relationship between traditional media outlets, traditional journalism, and social media platform search engines. The one used needs as a lead product, others are benefiting from traffic that comes from those digital platforms. What does this mean in terms of revenues? Well, let me try to upload my screen here. Okay, I see that you have deactivated the screen sharing. I'm not sure whether you can reactivate it for me. If you can't, okay, maybe I can do it. Can you see my screen at the moment? Okay. Yes. Okay. So this is the screen which I wanted to show you. So this is an excerpt from the 2019 report from the Australian Consumer and Competition Commission in its digital platform inquiry. And the graph on the screen is very interesting because it shows that on the left-hand side, total advertising expenditure by media formats in 2018, which is at the end of the graph, was approximately the same as the total advertising expenditure in, say, 2006. It's about 16 billion Australian dollars, which is approximately 12 billion Swiss francs. However, and that's something which is very apparent from this chart, you see that over the same time period between 2006 and 2018, online advertising, which is the yellow part, has progressively captured the bulk of the traditional ad expenditure in print media, which is the decreasing blue part. And so you see there really a change, online advertising growing, in fact, at the expense of ad expenditure in print media. And then on the right-hand part of the screen, there you can see that, in fact, of the total approximately 8.5 billion Australian dollars which are spent online in 2018, approximately 5 billion were spent on Google and Facebook property. For me, the key point in here is the decrease in the advertising revenues from traditional media, and the fact that this decrease in advertising revenues that go to traditional media has had really dramatic consequences in terms of both employment and news coverage. In terms of employment, let me come back to the screen. In terms of employment, what has happened is that the number of people employed by traditional media in Australia over the same period has decreased by approximately 9–10%. And another consequence of this loss in revenues is that the number of local and regional newspapers at the same time has decreased by more than 15%, with the result that there are a large number of regional areas in Australia that no longer have any local news or local newspapers. And that's the background against which the Australian legislature is now looking at the Australian Media Code. What does the code provide? The first point is a point which has been mentioned by one of you in the introduction, and it's that the proposal allows collective bargaining between news publishers and Google, Facebook, what we call the designated platforms, designated technology platforms. And it provides for collective bargaining because of the perceived imbalance in the bargaining power between individual news publishers and the social media platforms such as Google or such as Facebook or search engines such as Google. So the first thing which the proposal provides is this collective bargaining to try to redress the bargaining power and the negotiating power in the discussions about compensation. The second thing which the code provides is that the platforms are required to compensate publishers and in fact share with publishers the benefit which those platforms derive from the inclusion of news from media outlets into their services. So that's the second point. The third point, which goes also to the and trying to address this imbalance in the bargaining power, relates to the process through which the agreement can be reached, and it provides for, in fact, a pretty detailed, complex, and you could say pretty long negotiation process between Google, Facebook, and the news media. It provides first for negotiated agreement, and if after some time no result or no reasonable result is achieved, then the code starts applying. The code starts applying, gives the publisher still 1 month to negotiate. Then it will move to mediation for a period of 2 months. And if it doesn't work, if after mediation there is no result, then what's called final offer arbitration will kick in, pursuant to which the arbitral tribunal will select the last offer made by the two parties, which that tribunal deems to be reasonable. There will not be a long arbitration process. It's called final offer arbitration. You come to the table, you hope that your offer, your last offer, will be the one selected by the arbitral tribunal. And so that's the process which is set up. Again, a process which is really aimed at encouraging the parties to the negotiation to come to the table with a reasonable offer and try to strike a good deal. So that's, if you want, the contents of the code as it appears today, again, after discussions which took place until last night between Facebook in particular and the Australian government. What is the position that has been taken by the various parties on this? As I think you mentioned, Google initially threatened to withdraw completely from the Australian market and then quickly changed back and came back to the changed position. And since the adoption of the code, or at least the release of the proposal of the code, Google has cut deals with two major Australian news publishers, News Corp and Seven West Media. So that has been the reaction. First, a reaction which was no way we're going to get out, and then coming back to the table. Both deals that have been concluded by Google, based on reports that we can see from news such as Reuters, are multi-year long deal, and both of them provide for, in fact, tens of millions of compensation to News Corp and to Seven West Media, which by the way is an aggregation, a collection of several newspaper titles. Facebook has, and it was also a pretty remarkable position which has made a lot of noise. Facebook has cut off at the publishers. It has prevented users in Australia from accessing Australian as well as international news. Then Facebook has changed a little bit position. It has negotiated with the government, and from those negotiations came the process which I described, which in fact, in total, gives 6 months to Facebook, Google, and the publishers to negotiate before this last offer arbitration kicks in. So that's something which Facebook was really insisting to get, was time to negotiate commercial agreements before the kicking off of the arbitration. We came to this debate, and as you mentioned, Brad Smith, our president, has been pretty clear from the beginning that, look, if Google decides to withdraw from the market, we'll come in and we'll take the role. We are willing to pay news publishers. And the reason why we have taken this position is that I think it reflects our vision of the values that we think technologies, digital technologies need to serve. It's clear for us that when you see the disruptions which are caused by digital technologies, you need to think a little bit at the role that you want those technologies to play in the future and the values that they need to help, to provide, to serve. And those values, the most important ones are definitely human rights, those human rights and fundamental rights that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration. These are the democracy, the processes on which democracies are relying. And we think, we're not the only ones, but clearly journalism is a key instrument to define and to protect those human rights, to protect democracies. The journalism is built on the pillars of truth, on pillars of reliability. In fact, what journalism is doing, what traditional news are doing, is they are giving a sort of common view, common understanding of the facts, on the basis of which then parties, stakeholders can engage in discussions, can engage in the exchange of opinion. They are giving the facts on the basis of which people can just express their position in the democratic process. Therefore, for us, it is very important to see traditional journalism, traditional news outlets being protected in these times. Is it really the end of the story? Probably not. And I think that one point which is also important to realize is that I think news and traditional journalism will come to a point where they are adapting to the digital era in which we are, and they will have to consider necessarily opportunities to attract the audience directly. They will also probably consider opportunities to strike other partnerships which provide them with the revenues which they need, consider opportunities to mobilize their audience and mobilize their ability to put the facts into perspective and give a broader view than the mere news are providing. So I think that these are things that will happen also on the side of the media. And then on the side of the digital platforms, but especially those platforms that are providing access to assets, values built by others, I think it's important to also to realize that we need to share the revenues that those platforms are making. It's not simply a question of justice, but it's also a question of long-term value creation. Those don't share, then those businesses on which the platform are building, and there will be nothing. So that's where we are in the media code. These encouragements to engage in commercial discussions, these have already been stricken by Google. I'm sure Facebook is going to, well, I'm not in their shoes, but maybe they will do the same, try to enter into deals over a 6 months period that is now granted. But it's also important to step back and think a little bit about a longer future for both the media and for the digital platforms themselves.
Thank you, Jean-Yves. I think this was quite a comprehensive coverage, and actually you stole a couple of my questions related to how the money features into that, and what are the plans for maybe other countries or expectations. We have time to get back to those. The chat is active, and Sonia is following on that. So feel free for every one of you to just throw your questions and comments on this issue. We're moving on with the trends, but again, we'll be able to reflect on this one once again after the 3 trends within more of the Q&A part. So Jean-Yves, stay with us, please, if you can. And moving on to the second trend of the month, it is related to something that actually popped up some days ago, and we were not sure whether this would be the trend. We had another candidate, but it appeared that this is going to be the second trend related to gig economy and the rights of the workers in this digital age. So I pass the floor now to Marilia to lead us through this second trend. Marilia, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Vlada. Well, the work status of drivers and other contractors in the so-called gig economy has been under discussion in several countries for some time, so this is hardly news. But what the news is that the understanding on this issue apparently is starting to emerge to see these professionals as workers with some worker rights. So this month, a Supreme Court decision in the UK granted a legal victory to Uber drivers by confirming that Uber drivers are not full-fledged employees in the strict sense of the term, but they are workers in the extended sense of the term, with some worker rights such as paid leave, such as minimum wage, for instance. So Uber drivers in the UK will have certain rights. This decision is final and has been considered a setback for Uber in the UK. So in the face of this, in the context of the European Union, Uber has decided to act preemptively. So this month they have put forth a white paper called A Better Deal, in which they move ahead of the European Commission that is planning to start a full-fledged discussion on the regulation of the working conditions in the gig economy soon. And in this paper, Uber is calling for industry-wide standard to afford some rights to drivers. It is lobbying for a solution that is similar to the solution found in California in the US after the approval of Proposition 22. So the solution would be to retain the status of drivers as independent contractors, but at the same time to grant them some rights and to provide them a certain social safety net, for instance, such as providing them support, health coverage if they work for a next number of hours with Uber. This represents far less than was granted to drivers in the UK by recognizing them as workers, which is a legal category that is very peculiar to the UK, that falls between employees and self-contracted workers. So the bottom line here is that a compromise solution seems to be gaining traction, not considering the drivers full-fledged employees, but granting them some rights. And unlike before, Uber seems to be open to grant some rights to drivers, but the extent of these rights seems to be the matter that will be under debate from now on. Over to you, Vlada.
Thank you, Marilia. Let me now use the opportunity to pass the floor to Sonia to see whether there were any reflections in the chat, and then certainly we can save more time after the three trends to reflect on all of them. Sonia. Yeah.
Hello, thank you, Vlada. Actually, yes, we did have one question from Miguel Coelho dos Santos. He said, while Jean was speaking, are these decisions based on unfair competition, anti-monopoly laws, copyright, etc., or is this more like cars replacing horses and the horse companies wanting some of the business back? Is this a long-term solution or just a temporary patch and another whole new model for funding journalists that they've lost to digital media?
Thank you. What I suggest is that, I invite Jean-Yves and Stephanie to remember the question. We'll get back to that immediately after the third trend then. Let's collect all the questions, and then we'll just run through the questions and the reflections from your side. Thank you, Sonia. Let's move to the trend number 3, which is related to cryptocurrencies. So I won't take much time. Let me pass the floor immediately to Arvin, who can summarize the main developments in this field. Arvin, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vlada, and hi to all. Nice to see you for another briefing. As Vlada mentioned, this couple of months we usually get cross the developments in cryptocurrency and digital currency areas. So just in short, I will mention a couple of big major updates for the past couple of months. First of all, on the business side, we all heard the big news to say that the biggest car company in the world, Tesla, actually invested $1.5 billion as an investment strategy in cryptocurrency Bitcoin. Of course, that launched the price of the Bitcoin and kind of push another companies to think about adding Bitcoin as an asset to their investment portfolios, basically kind of held cash in cash reserves in cryptocurrencies. Again, not just Tesla, a company a month earlier from the January, the biggest online payment company, PayPal, actually approved the use of cryptocurrency on its platform. And that boosted the number of users for PayPal, and the PayPal officials actually started that the number of users was way bigger than all of their boldest estimates. So it proves that the kind of the big payment solutions start implementing cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency are going to focus into a focus of course, regulators. And on the regulatory side, interesting things from past couple of months, China actually finalized the pilot project for a digital yuan, which is a central bank digital currency. We will get on that a bit later, but just like, as an update, China's government actually organized a lottery and gave up a $3 million worth of digital yuan in a pilot project in 2 towns, in the Shenzhen and Suzhou. I think I pronounced that right. And this marked the final stage in a kind of completing the CBDS, central bank digital currency. Why is this important, and why now? How is this now round up? Basically, the major private banks, apart from the central banks, major private banks and fintech corporations were involved in this last test, and those are of course Tencent and the Ant Group, which is the second largest financial institution in China. So in this way, China kind of united the space in business sector and in public sector, of course, central banks, and now has a complete developed product. Why they are still not launching it fully, and why is this still kind of a pilot phase? It's really up to the Chinese government now to kind of start it on their own, or wait for a decision on a global level, a regulatory decision on a global level, which is most likely going to happen at the next G8 meeting or a G20 meeting, on which G20 leaders and IMF will discuss about the central bank digital currencies. And when I mentioned IMF, of course, in their recent research, they pointed out that even though central banks can and will eventually issue these currencies, the main thing will be a private-public partnership, because this technology-driven money would need to be in a kind of controlled and managed in a corporation with private sector big technology companies. That was on a regulatory side, and just a short update again on a couple of news you heard around the newsrooms. First, governments of India will actually pass through the parliament a set of laws which will actually ban, as they call it, private cryptocurrency, meaning Bitcoin mostly. And this is let's say fourth time in the history that India is trying to push this law. So far they were not so successful, but let's see, they might even bypass the parliament to actually go with this. It's of course reasoned by the fight for anonymous funding of terrorism or other activities which are illegal. So I guess this might be successful. On the same note, sorry, Nigeria's central financial institution sent the banks to all of the country banks, asking them to identify users and accounts which are related to the cryptocurrencies and actually shut them down. So apparently Nigeria is also shutting down the, let's say, banking sector related to the, or bank accounts related to the cryptocurrencies, of course. We saw it on a spot that this was a short breath. Only a couple of days after, a lot of neighbors from Nigeria, for example, we heard from Cameroon and other states, actually come to Nigeria and start selling cryptocurrencies off the counter, let's say, not using bank account. On the development side, we will hear a bit later a really interesting update from our curators in Africa on a big fund created by Jack Dorsey, Twitter CEO, and the famous using of Jay-Z for actually developing entrepreneurs in Africa. They pledged a significant amount of money in that fund, but we will hear a bit from our curators. Thank you, Vlada. That will be it. Of course, questions. I'm here for questions.
Thank you, Armin, and a great connection to actually what we used to do usually in the previous rounds of briefings was that we have the regional updates at the end of the briefing. But so many things on different regions around the world are very interconnected with these global developments that it would be pity not to hear those perspectives. So we are switching immediately to the updates from Africa, where Grace is bringing exactly the updates related to cryptocurrencies, and then we'll move on to Caribbean, where Andre will do the same. So let's hear from Grace on the African perspective.
In Africa, in South Africa, we had reports of people being, or taxpayers being asked by the tax authorities in South Africa to give additional information on their tax filings. So there were people who were being asked to give information on why they purchased cryptocurrencies and to bring letters from the platforms where they traded their cryptocurrency. And then on the other side of the continent in Nigeria, we had the Central Bank of Nigeria actually prohibiting commercial banks and other financial institutions from operating accounts for cryptocurrency networks. This effectively means that it's really, really difficult for cryptocurrency networks to operate, but it hasn't stopped cryptocurrency trading. People are still doing peer-to-peer trading, but this has been a very grave decision because Nigeria is actually the world's second largest in terms of volume in cryptocurrency trading. It only comes second after the US. And another interesting development still in cryptocurrency is that Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, together with rapper Jay-Z, announced a fund for cryptocurrency development in Africa and India. The fund, they'll actually be putting 500 Bitcoins to start, and it's an irrevocable trust, and so it's a development that we'll continue to watch.
Andre Edwards with Caribbean Updates. MasterCard and Island Pay unveiled central bank digital currency prepaid card. MasterCard, the Central Bank of the Bahamas, and Island Pay announced a new collaborative program where the Bahamas Sand Dollar prepaid card will provide the option to convert the digital currency to traditional Bahamian dollars instantly and pay for goods and services everywhere MasterCard is accepted on the islands and around the world. The Bahamian Central Bank issues the digital sand dollar, which maintains the same value and consumer protections as a traditional Bahamian dollar. The combination of Island Pay's technology platform, MasterCard's technology, and wide merchant acceptance can potentially reduce the operational distribution costs of cash and modernize the overall payment system in the Bahamas.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Andre. This was quite interesting to see what are the new dynamics in different regions. Now, we have some time for Q&A, but before I pass the floor back to Sonia to tell us what were the discussions in the chat and if there are any questions in the meantime, I wanted to ask you to let us know what you think was the top trend of the month. Well, we suggested one of the three that we selected, but we also allowed this other there. So feel free to cast your vote. What you have to do is, I'm sure many of you are familiar, open a browser either here on the computer or in a mobile phone, go to menti.com, type the code which is on the screen, and then you'll have the option to cast your vote. We want to see what you think is the top trend. While you're voting, we'll get back to this slide in a few minutes. But let me get back now to Sonia to see whether there were any new questions or comments in the chat. Sonia, any thoughts from your side? And certainly you can repeat the question which we had previously for Jean-Yves and Stephanie. Maybe they want to reflect. Sonia.
Thank you, Vlada. And yeah, just like Vlada said, please feel free to vote on Menti, because we'll be commenting on the results just in a while. So we do have a new question, but first I'll go over the first question by Miguel. And his question was about the new decisions in Australia regarding platforms paying news companies for their content compensation. So he was asking whether these decisions are based on unfair competition, anti-monopoly laws, and copyright, or is this whether this is a long-term solution or just a temporary patch. And we do have a new question regarding our third trend. And Abdel Jalil Basharbong asked if Bitcoin can change the setup rules of the banking ecosystem, and if we think that the global framework of Bitcoin will help develop the confidence for the entire multi-stakeholder community. And which Marilia commented as saying that this is pretty much a trial and error phase, and it's a moment similar to what happened to when P2P sharing of music became popular. Ideas popped up, and well, some of them grew and they're still here today, and some of them are now considered illegal. So in any case, she says, this is mostly being framed as compensation rather than entirely new funding model. And both Marilia and myself encourage other colleagues and participants to comment further on that. And it would be great, Vlada, if we could have the Menti code on screen behind you for our participants. And just another quick reminder how to do it. You can do it on mobile or desktop, and we will have the code on screen just right now, and just head to menti.com and enter the code and participate. Back to you, Vlada.
Thanks a lot, Sonia. Let's use, while people are casting their votes, let's use the few minutes, quick reflections from Jean-Yves and then Stephanie on the first question, and then Arvin on the second question. But please try to be brief within a sort of a tweet, like within a minute, so that we keep up to the schedule. Jean-Yves, if you are still with us, I think so. Quick reflection on your side.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. So the question is whether these laws in Australia are unfair competition or copyright, whether it's temporary or long-term. I think it's a very interesting question. I think that in Italy, in Australia, I'm sorry, the provisions in the media code also have a number of competition angles because they deal with other issues such as self-preferencing. I mean, the kind of issues that have been dealt with on the competition law in other jurisdictions. This being said, it's interesting because this provision and this in fact requirement for news publishers and digital platforms to come to negotiation on the use of news is something which is indirectly embodied in European law in the revised copyright directive. So you have sometimes competition aspects, you also have copyright aspects. The one point which I would underline, though, because for me it's also a very important one, is that what is happening in Australia is and is also likely to happen in other jurisdictions. France, it has already happened. The EU, US, UK, all those jurisdictions are looking at the relationship between news media, traditional news media, and digital platform. And I think that this is also partly the reason why the reaction to the Austrian Media Code has been so, vivid in the IT industry generally. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Yves. Stephanie, I don't know if you want quickly to comment on that.
Sure, Vlada. Yeah, as Jean-Yves was saying, Miguel's question is very interesting, and it did remind me of an Economist article, which I read a few months back, which said, does the big tech need to save traditional media? And the author said, immediately following this heading, said, no, traditional media should save itself. But I think so. This is, a reminder of what Miguel had. But I think, as Jean-Yves was saying, the issue in Australia, let's say the main issue is this imbalance or perceived imbalance in the bargaining power. And I think this is what the law is trying to address. Does traditional media need to adapt? Certainly. Should the big tech help it adapt? Yes, but I don't think that it's just for the sake of helping traditional media. And this is why I think the discussion in Australia is about the compensation also, as Marilia was saying. That's it, Vlada, from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Quick floor back to Arvin on the second question. Arvin, if you want to react briefly.
Yeah, let me just unmute myself first. Yeah, thanks, Vlada. The Bitcoin already pushed the banking sector in a way. We see for the last half decade, 5 years, all banking fees are dropping down like significantly, more than 80%. Every fintech company is now talking about transferring money fast. So the financial sector is already developed a lot of was developed in the last 5 or 10 years rapidly because of the push of decentralized currencies, which they can be found online. Again, as I mentioned in the central bank digital currency, it will push also governments, central banks to think about the new form of money, which will be programmable. I know it sounds funny now, ridiculous, but just remember that we started from the gold bullets and shelves, etc. So this is just a kind of an evolution in money. So yeah, it will push public-private partnership to new levels in envisaging new practices in finance world. So thanks.
Thank you, Arvin. Well, I'm sure you can continue the chat. I know Marilia also commented. You can continue discussions in the chat, but we have to run on with the program in a way. And a quick reflection, as I can see, is that the top trend, according to your thoughts, is or votes, is the news issue or the content issue, which I guess is quite expectable, since it is a sort of a new topic on the agenda, and it will be interesting to follow in the future as well. We'll certainly do that both on the Digital Watch and in the monthly briefing, what's happening with that. In the meantime, Sonia, certainly you can follow on the chat and maybe stimulate people to see whether what came under other trends, and then at the end we can bring it on. Let's move on with a couple of other developments that we had this month, which didn't fall within these three main trends. So we have something that we call a barometer, as you know, which is sort of measuring the pressure of different topics on the agenda. And for this month, what we noticed is that the biggest pressure, in a way, is related to security, to jurisdiction legal aspects, and to economic, in a way, and e-commerce aspects, as you could see. Two particular types of developments that we had. One is related to cybersecurity, and since it's my field, in a way, I like to briefly summarize. So we have seen sophisticated, high-impact attacks, which are emerging more than it was before. Sort of, we are seeing cybersecurity as an imminent high impact threat or risk. It's not really a black swan thing. It's someone would call it a gray rhino. We know it's running ahead of us or towards us, and we should be acting towards that. And some of the examples are certainly the SolarWinds case, which still develops from December on, and the recent attack against the drinking water facility in Florida, which was sort of a very dangerous situation, luckily without much of the consequences. At the same time, we're seeing the attacks against the cybersecurity researchers, allegedly coming from North Korea. It's really hard to say where, but this shows the sort of a courage of the attackers and adversaries to even attack the gatekeepers in a way, or defendants, which is signaling something. On a positive side, we are seeing some of the success of combating cybercrime. We had two very important actions, global actions, led by FBI, Europol, and many law enforcement agencies against famous or infamous Networker and Emotet, botnets and malware platforms. We are also seeing open-ended working group of the UN hopefully having its final meeting in March as scheduled. There is a zero draft of the output document. This is the basis for discussions. There'll be some of the informal discussions as well around that. And besides that, the OECD has published very useful reports on security of digital products and vulnerability management. So there are some good signals as well. There was another trend for which I invite my colleague Andriana to briefly reflect, which is related to antitrust and monopoly. So Andriana, you can probably just join us and tell us what it is about the antitrust issues.
Thank you for the floor, Vlada. China has passed its antitrust rules, which were introduced late last year. The new regulation will put pressure on several companies that are already facing antitrust investigations, including the Alibaba Group. And we'll hear about that in a minute from our curator, Amrita, who covers the Asian Pacific development. In India, too, the big tech is under scrutiny, and an investigation has been launched into Amazon's practices. This comes after a special report that was published by Reuters, which has stated that Amazon has developed a way to dodge the rules that protect the small retailers. What does this show? It shows that big tech is under intense scrutiny, not only in the USA and in the EU, where investigations are usually launched, but also in other countries such as India and China. And this makes it an issue of global concern. Now, I promise we will hear a bit more about China's antitrust rules, and we will hear from Amrita about that. So we are briefly going back to India, where we started this briefing.
The Chinese State Administration for Market Regulation, SAMR, issued new antitrust rules that restrict monopolistic practices of internet platforms in the country. The new regulation bars tech companies from forcing sellers to choose only one e-commerce site to operate, fixing prices, restricting technologies, and using data and algorithms to manipulate the market. The regulation will put pressure on several companies that are already facing antitrust investigations, including the Alibaba Group.
Thank you for that update, Amrita. Now, we haven't heard a lot from the Middle East and North African region in this briefing, so now we'll give the floor to Noha, who will tell us some things about artificial intelligence updates in Saudi Arabia. Without further ado, over to Noha.
From the energy sector. The center will work towards promoting national energy priorities and developing AI for the energy sector. It will further contribute to building the national AI capabilities and competences in the energy sector and will support, develop, review, and implement strategies in the area of data and AI in the energy and gas sectors. The second update is regarding a new partnership between the Saudi Data and Artificial Intelligence Authority and Dutch technology company Royal Philips to promote the use of artificial intelligence in healthcare sector. This agreement is part of the efforts to promote advanced technologies in the health field, support expertise exchange, and develop national capabilities, which will enhance the quality of health services, create new job opportunities, and elevate the national economy to become a data and AI-driven economy. Thank you so much. Stay safe.
Thank you for those interesting developments, Naha. And for our audience, all the developments that you just heard that we outlined throughout this entire briefing can be found on Digital Watch. And you can find more there. This is just a selection, a highlight, if you will. Lado, back to you.
Thank you, Adriana. Before we run to the events of the next month, I want to pass the screen again to Sonia to see whether there are new developments in the chat and any other comments related to the trends of the month. Sonia.
Yes, we do have new comments and questions in chat, and they're all related to the news content trend that we had and that came first in our poll. So the first question was by Susan Brown Shafi, and she was asking whether Rupert Murdoch played an essential role in of the drafting of the code in Australia. And I'll just continue with the other questions. And Dayan Dinjic has commented that the question about cars and the comparison between cars and horses was nice, but maybe there's a difference between news and the cars and horses analogy. Then that could be search engines. Is that the search engines and similar platforms don't create news, but they still compete with them directly. And Isaac Minar commented that on the same subject, journalism as the fourth estate is a key element to making democracy work. Therefore, public policymakers have an obligation to create an enabling environment for credible journalism, irrespective of platform, to survive and thrive. That should include arrangements for big tech and other actors to support public interest journalism in line with requirements of local economic ecosystems and dependencies. And Stefan Marilia also chimed in saying, Stephanie said, it's more of a question of compensation, whether it's a search engine or social media platform. The spirit of the Australian code is that media houses need to become compensated and their interests safeguarded when negotiating with giant companies. And Marilia added how Dayan's point is very valid, but news are used to attract and keep eyeballs turned to them referring to the tech giants, and to know more about their interests, which for platforms, of course, mean increased revenue. And where from this comment, I understand that most of our colleagues and participants agree that at some level, news companies should be compensated because tech giants are both attracting visitors and making increased revenues from the news content.
Thank you, Sonia. Well, I see chat is quite lively as always. So I leave it at that. We are not going to come back to comments. It would take too much time. But I do encourage all of the contributors and experts, including our guests, to share their thoughts through the chat. So it'll be interesting to develop more through the chat. In the meantime, let's move on with what's coming next month. So what are the main events? And, well, let's see what are the main developments of the next month. In this regards, while we are running through the events of the next month, we are again asking you, what are the key developments that you expect next month? So there is a sort of a poll, a Mentimeter, which will ask you, what do you think will be one of the priority areas with the highest pressure next month out of these various areas that we cover, from IG architecture to infrastructure to cybersecurity, juridical and legal issues, and so on and so forth. While you're voting, let me pass back to Andriana to lead us through what are the main events of the next months and related to that. Andriana.
Thank you, Vlado. For next month, we have selected a few events to highlight. However, most of the events that are due next month do not have, if you'll just let me.
I'll move it, I'll move
it. Most of the events that are due next month have not come out with a detailed agenda yet. We can tell you some educated guesses and perhaps some broader ideas behind the events. The UN Human Rights Council, and this we'll know for sure, will consider the reports by Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy, Joseph Kanatachi. We will certainly follow up on this during the next month, either on Digital Watch or perhaps in our next briefing. The ITU World Telecom Standardization Assembly, that's a mouthful, is postponed to 2022. And this will be a hot event considering China's new IP standards and the debate that issued around that. Now, Vlad already mentioned the OEWG third and final substantive session. The state will consider the agenda item number 7, which is entitled Adoption of the Report. This will be interesting to follow, and a team of GIP rapporteurs will follow and report from all the sessions, as each session is quite long, 3 hours as far as I can remember. Perhaps it will be a bit easier to skim through our reports. We will certainly do an analysis on that as well, and we'll see what happens considering that there isn't consensus on many questions. And last but not least, ICANN 70 will probably discuss a potential launch of a new GTLD round, the WHOIS redesign, and promoting the notion of technical internet governance. I would like to invite Sonia to tell us whether any events have been mentioned by our audience that we might have missed.
Thank you, Andriana. No new events mentioned yet at this point, but just very shortly, we do have by Mark Carville a suggestion for about in the next briefing, perhaps talking about the UN Secretary General's tech envoy being appointed.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Mark, for the comment. By the way, if any one of you have any event that we might have missed on the Digital Watch, this is just the main events of the next month, but the more detailed list, as Andriana mentioned, is on the Digital Watch. Let us know here or afterwards to add to the list.
Interrupt, because just as we were speaking, we did have from Ying Chu Chen, the IGF Open consultation and the MAG meeting talked about the roadmap for digital cooperation yesterday. So we did have an event, and sorry to interrupt.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for interrupting. I hope there'll be more of the events, still most of them online, but well, we hope to move a bit more into face-to-face. Looking at the poll results and what we can expect next month, what I see is the global IG architecture and cybersecurity dominating. It will be interesting when it comes to cybersecurity. I suppose what we can expect, unfortunately, is more and more attacks, but also the final meeting of the open-ended working group. But it will be interesting to hear from you in the chat what do you expect in terms of the global IG architecture. I guess decision about the tech envoy and the follow-up discussions on that might be one, but there might be more, so please share with us. And at this time, it's maybe time to move on to seeing what Diplo is giving you, as we call it, from Diplo with love. From Geneva. So I thank you, Andriana, for joining, and I'll pass the floor actually to my colleague Marco in Geneva to lead us through the events that Diplo and the Geneva Internet Platform will offer next month. Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vlada, and good afternoon to all. Yes, we have quite some interesting events coming up in the next month. The first one that I will mention is the one about digital foreign policy strategies. It will be on the 2nd of March, and my colleague Sonia can drop the link for registration in the chat. You can also find it on the DIPLO website. It will basically analyze the digital foreign strategies taken by states so far and those that are under discussion, main threats and points in common and points that are not common. The other important development from the GIP side is the one regarding the 12 tours. As many of you know, the Geneva Internet Platform last year published a new, an updated Geneva Digital Atlas, which reviews who does what when it comes to digital in Geneva. The follow-up to that activity, not only logically, but also practically, is the 12 tours. Basically, we will take a thematic approach and we'll analyze the Geneva's digital policy scene through different lenses each month. As of today, we have published the first tour, which is the historical and philosophical tour. And it's important because we decided to start the conversation by looking at what type of thinkers and philosophers can help us understand the interplays between technology and humanity. I will mention just one thing is that this first tour is mainly text to read. That is also open for contributions. You can read and tell us what you think about our review of influential thinkers in Geneva. And you can also fill in a form to tell us whether we have forgotten someone or any important contributions by other thinkers. And on the link that I will also post in the chat, you can find the calendar for the upcoming tours. For example, the upcoming one at the end of March will be about standardization. That is all from my side. Vlada, the floor is back to you.
Thank you, Marco. Well, as you could see, DIPLO and the GIP will be quite active again in March. We welcome you at our other online events. And with this, we come to the end of our monthly briefing for February. This was quite an experiment. As you could see, I was trying to find a way where to move that you can see the screen, and we're jumping in and out. So please forgive us if there were any technical glitches. We'll try to improve. And let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, what we can improve, or in terms of content, in terms of performance in the setup. A kind reminder, this was a tip of the iceberg. For more details, please follow Digital Watch, the updates, the events, and certainly subscribe to the newsletter. The next edition of the newsletter will be available for download at the Observatory in the next days, covering these and many more topics and more details. Excellent reading with a cup of coffee. Well, thank you for participating today. See you at the end of March for our next briefing. That is Tuesday, 30th of March, 13 UTC again. Till then, stay safe and see you around. Bye-bye.